I thought $400 a month was enough to start over. For the first few months in the Philippines, it actually was. The rent was cheap, the food was cheap, and for the first time in years, I wasn't lying awake at night doing math in my head. But 14 months later, I had less than $3,000 to my name, no plan to get home, and I was sitting alone in a room that cost me $180 a month, trying to figure out where everything went. This is what happened, and I'm telling it the way it actually went, not the way I wish it had. My name is Robert. I'm 63 years old. I spent 38 years teaching 5th grade at an elementary school in Central Ohio. I know what you're thinking. A teacher with a pension? That's not so bad. And it wasn't. But I was never a saver. I put enough into the state retirement system to qualify for a pension, and when I finally walked out of that school for the last time, my monthly check came out to whopping $400. That was it. No 401k worth mentioning. No investments. I had about $44,000 sitting in a savings account that I had scraped together over the last decade, mostly from selling my house after my wife passed and downsizing into an apartment. Karen died 6 years before I retired. Cancer. We had been married for 31 years, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I handled her death well, because I didn't. I kept working because I didn't know what else to do. But by the time I hit 62, the job that had once felt like a calling started to feel like the only thing holding me in place, and not in a good way. Every September I walked into a new classroom and felt a little less of what I used to feel when I did that. I wasn't burned out exactly. I was just empty. The kind of empty that doesn't fill back up with a summer vacation or a long weekend. I retired at 62. Not because I was ready, because I was done. The problem was that $400 a month in Columbus, Ohio, doesn't go very far. My apartment alone was $950. After utilities, groceries, my car, and the occasional medical copay, I was draining my savings every single month just to cover the basics. I did the math one night and it scared me. At that rate, my $44,000 would be gone in 3 years, maybe 4 if I was careful. And then what? I'd be 65, 66 years old, with no savings, no property, and a pension that wasn't enough to pay rent. That's when I started watching the videos. It started the way it probably starts for a lot of people. A late night, a YouTube rabbit hole, and suddenly there's a guy on my screen sitting on a porch somewhere in Southeast Asia talking about how he lives better than he ever did in the States for $900 a month. Then another video. Then another. Different people, different towns, same message. If you have $1,000 or more coming in every month, you can live well here, eat well, have a life, not just survive. I watched for about 2 months before I started taking it seriously. I joined Facebook groups, I read forums. I went through comment sections looking for people who had actually done it, not just people selling a dream, and the consensus was pretty consistent. If you lived simply, avoided the tourist traps, cooked at home most of the time, you could make $400 stretch a long way in the Philippines. Longer than anything I could do in Ohio. I want to be honest about my state of mind when I made that decision, because I think it matters. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was lonely. I had been lonely for 6 years, and I had gotten so used to it that I had stopped noticing how much it was affecting every choice I made. When I looked at those videos, I wasn't just seeing a cheaper cost of living. I was seeing people who had found something, community, a reason to leave the house, a sense that life still had more in it, and I wanted that. I wanted it badly enough that I stopped asking the harder questions. I gave up my apartment, sold my car, packed 2 bags, put the rest of my things in a storage unit, and bought a one-way ticket to Cebu. I landed in April. The heat was the first thing I noticed, that thick, humid wall of air that hits you the second you walk out of the airport. Everything was loud and fast and completely unfamiliar. For about 48 hours I was genuinely overwhelmed. But then something shifted. I found a small apartment in a neighborhood about 20 minutes from the city center. It cost me 500 pesos a month, just under $170. It had a ceiling fan, a small kitchen, a bathroom with cold water only, and a window that looked out onto the street. It was the smallest place I had lived in since college, and honestly, for the first few weeks, I loved it. The first month I tracked every peso: rent, food, transportation, water, mobile data, the occasional meal out. I came in at just under $820 for the month. For the first time since Karen died, I felt like I was ahead of something instead of behind it. I had $580 left over at the end of the month. $580, sitting there, not needed. I can't explain how good that felt after years of watching my savings slowly disappear. I told my son Daniel about it over a video call. He was skeptical. He had been skeptical from the beginning, told me to think about it more before I sold the car. But even he had to admit the numbers looked real. I remember him saying, "Okay, Dad, but what are you actually doing over there?" And I didn't have a good answer. The truth was, I wasn't doing much. I was walking, eating, sitting in coffee shops, watching life happen around me from the outside. And that was fine at first. More than fine. After 38 years of noise and schedules and 30 kids demanding my attention at once, the quiet felt like a gift. I'd wake up with no alarm, make coffee, sit by the window, read, walk to the market in the morning, eat lunch at whatever small place caught my eye, walk back, read some more. It felt like rest, real rest, the kind I hadn't allowed myself in a long time. But rest has a shelf life. By month 2, the quiet had started to change its character. It stopped feeling like peace and started feeling like something else. I'd go entire days without a real conversation. Not just small talk. Actual conversation. The kind where someone asks how you're doing and means it. I'd sit in a restaurant and watch families at the tables around me, 3 generations squeezed around a single plate of rice, talking over each other, and I'd feel this strange ache that I didn't quite have a word for. Not sadness exactly. More like absence. Like I was watching life through a window I couldn't open. I started going to the same small carinderia for breakfast most mornings. It was nothing fancy. A few plastic tables, a woman cooking behind a counter, a chalkboard menu with maybe 8 things on it. But it was consistent, and after weeks of inconsistency, I needed something consistent. The woman who ran it was named Maritz. She was maybe 50, solid, no nonsense, always busy. Her daughter Jessa helped her most mornings before heading off to her job at a call center. Jessa was 27. She spoke good English, better than most people I'd met in the neighborhood, because of her work. At first, she'd just take my order and bring my food, and that was it. Professional, polite, efficient. But one morning I sat down and she was the only one there. Maritz had gone to the market, and Jessa sat across from me while I ate, and we just started talking. She asked where I was from. I told her Ohio. She asked what Ohio was like. I said cold and flat and full of corn. She laughed, a real laugh, not a polite one. And that was the beginning. Over the next few weeks, our morning conversations became something I looked forward to. She'd ask about my teaching, about Karen, about what I missed about home. And she listened with this genuine curiosity that I hadn't experienced in a long time. Not the performative listening that people do when they're waiting for their turn to talk. Real listening. She'd follow up on things I mentioned in passing the week before. She remembered details. I felt seen. That's the simplest way to say it. After years of being invisible, I felt like someone could actually see me. Slowly, it became more than morning coffee. We started meeting on her days off, walking around the city, eating lunch somewhere. She showed me parts of the neighborhood I'd never found on my own. A fruit market tucked behind a school, a small park where old men played chess in the afternoon, a bakery that had been run by the same family for 40 years. I started looking forward to those days in a way I hadn't looked forward to anything in a very long time. I want to be clear about what I understood this to be. I was 63. She was 27. I was not naive enough to think this was something romantic, but I also wasn't clear-headed enough to see what it actually was. What I saw was friendship. What I felt was connection. And both of those things had been missing from my life for so long that having them again made everything else feel secondary. The first time she asked me for help, it felt like nothing. Her younger brother had an infection and needed antibiotics, and the pharmacy bill came to about 200 pesos, maybe $22. She said she was a little short that week and asked if she could borrow it and pay me back on her next payday. I told her not to worry about paying it back. It was $22. I had spent more than that on lunch back in Ohio without thinking twice. She thanked me with the kind of gratitude that felt outsized for the amount. And that warmth, the feeling of being thanked like you mattered, like your help actually changed something. It landed somewhere deep. I don't say that to make myself sound pathetic. I say it because I think a lot of men in my situation would have felt the same thing. When you've been alone for years, when no one has needed you for anything in a very long time, someone needing you, even for $22, it fills something. The second time was about a month later. Maritz had a problem with a supplier, and the carinderia was short on cash for the week's groceries. Could I lend them 3,000 pesos until Friday? That was about $54. Of course I could. And again, I told them not to worry about it. I want to pause here because I remember this moment clearly. I remember sitting with those two requests side by side in my head and telling myself it was fine, that I was helping a family that had been kind to me. That $76 total was nothing, that I wasn't being foolish, I was just being decent. And in isolation, both of those things were easy to believe. But isolation is the word that matters there, because nothing was actually in isolation. Over the next few months, the requests became more regular, never large. That was the thing I kept telling myself, these were never large amounts. A school fee for Jessa's youngest sister. A repair on the kitchen equipment at the carinderia. Help with a utility bill that came in higher than expected. Each one landed between $30 and $80. Each one came with a specific story and a specific reason and a specific expression of gratitude that made saying no feel not just stingy but unkind. And I kept saying yes. My monthly spending, which had come in at $20 in month 1, climbed to $980 in month 3. By month 5, it was sitting at $1,150. By month 7, $1,350. I was spending nearly as much as I was making on my pension, which meant I was bleeding my savings, the same savings I had moved across the world to protect. I noticed the numbers. I'm a grown man, I could do basic arithmetic. But every time I sat down to look at my bank balance, I'd find a reason to frame it differently. This month was unusual. Next month would be lighter. The carinderia would have a good week and Maritz would pay something back. I kept moving the goalpost for when I would actually address it. What made it so hard to see clearly was that emotionally, my life had genuinely improved. I wasn't sitting alone in a room anymore. I had a place to be in the mornings. I had people who knew my name, who asked about me, who seemed happy when I walked through the door. I had purpose again. The feeling of being useful, of mattering to someone. After years of nothing, that was worth something. And in my head, I kept converting every dollar I spent into the emotional equivalent. $70 for that feeling of being needed? That's cheap. $50 to feel like someone's family? I'd pay 10 times that. That's a dangerous way to think about money. But it's a very human way to think about loneliness. Around month 9, I started noticing something that I couldn't entirely explain away. The timing of the requests. They came reliably at the end of the month, or right after I mentioned anything that suggested I had money available, a comment about treating myself to a nice dinner, or that I was thinking about taking a short trip to another island. The requests were never huge, but they were never random either. They had a rhythm, and once I started seeing the rhythm, I couldn't unsee it. I didn't say anything right away, because saying something meant accepting what I was starting to suspect, and accepting that meant looking back at 14 months of my life and reclassifying what I thought they were. It meant the mornings at the carinderia, the walks around the city, the conversations about Karen in Ohio, and what I missed. It meant all of that had a different shape than the one I'd given it, and I wasn't ready to do that. So I kept going. For another month, maybe 6 weeks, I kept going as if nothing had changed. Kept having my morning coffee. Kept saying yes to the small requests. Kept telling myself it was complicated and that I needed more information before I could draw any conclusions. My son Daniel was the one who finally broke through. He asked me on a call how my savings were looking, and I hesitated a second too long. He's sharp, Daniel, always has been, and he didn't let it go. I ended up telling him the number, $9,200. I had arrived 14 months earlier with $44,000. There was a long silence on his end. I'll spare the details of that conversation. But one thing he said stayed with me. He didn't say I was stupid. He didn't say I had been scammed, though I could hear him thinking it. What he said was, "Dad, when's the last time someone did something for you over there? Not with your money. For you." And I sat there and I genuinely could not think of an example. Not one. I went back to the Carinderia the next morning. I sat down and Jessa brought my coffee and we talked, and it was exactly the same as always. And I watched her, really watched her, and I tried to find something false in it. Some signal that the whole thing was performance. I couldn't. She was warm. She was genuine. She was, and this is what made it so hard, probably not a bad person. But I also couldn't forget Daniel's question. A few days later, when the next request came, Maritz needed help covering a permit renewal for the Carinderia, about $90. I said no for the first time. I said I was sorry, that I was trying to tighten up my budget, that I hoped things worked out. I kept my voice easy. Kept my face neutral. I was polite about it. The shift was immediate. Not dramatic, not angry, just immediate. Jessa was suddenly always busy when I came in. Maritz was pleasant but efficient, the way she'd been with me in the very beginning, before I had become useful. The easy conversation dried up. Within 2 weeks, the mornings that had been the center of my days felt like a transaction. Drink your coffee, leave a tip, go home. I stopped going after the third week. I want to be fair here, because I've had a lot of time to think about it since. I don't think Maritz and Jessa sat down and planned what they were going to do to the lonely American who ate breakfast at their Carinderia. I think it's more complicated than that. I think I was easy to be kind to because I was easy to help, and I was easy to help because my help cost me less than it meant to them. And over time, the relationship got shaped by that fact, whether anyone intended it or not. The kindness was real. The connection was real. But so was the utility. And when the utility went away, so did a lot of the rest. That's not villainy. That's just how some things work. But it cost me $34,000 and 14 months to learn it. I moved to a smaller apartment after that. Cheaper neighborhood, further from the city center. A longer walk to anything. I went back to the tracking every peso approach from month 1. I ate at home more. I stopped looking for connection in places where connection came with an unspoken price. The thing I've had the most time to think about is this. I didn't come to the Philippines and get scammed. That's too simple. I came to the Philippines and I was lonely, and lonely people make different decisions than people who aren't lonely. I paid for companionship the way other people pay for a gym membership or a therapist, except I told myself I wasn't paying for it, that it was freely given, and that turned out not to be entirely true. What the videos never told me, what no budget breakdown, no forum post, no YouTube comment section ever addressed, was that the cost of living number assumes you are fine, that you have enough social connection, enough purpose, enough of the invisible things that make life feel worth the effort. The moment those things are missing, the real cost of filling the gap is not on any spreadsheet. I email Daniel every week now. I've started going to a small expat church group on Sunday mornings, not because I'm especially religious, but because it's an hour of being around people who speak my language in the most literal sense. I've been more careful about separating genuine friendship from the kind of warmth that's tied to what I can provide. That's a harder line to draw than it sounds. My savings are at $8,700. I'm living on my pension, plus about $150 a month from savings, which is not where I need to be. Daniel has offered more than once to buy me a ticket home. I've told him not yet. Not because things are good exactly, but because I need to figure out what I would go back to. Ohio is not the answer I couldn't afford. Ohio is the question I ran away from. Here's what I know now that I didn't know when I landed. $400 a month in the Philippines is enough to survive. It might even be enough to live quietly, if quietly is what you actually want. But if what you want is connection, real, sustained, unconditional human connection, then that number doesn't matter. Because connection finds a way to cost you more than you had budgeted for, every single time. Not always because someone takes it. Sometimes just because needing people is expensive in ways that have nothing to do with money. I thought I was solving a math problem when I bought that ticket. Rent minus income. Peso versus dollar. Simple, clean. But you can't solve loneliness with arithmetic. And if you try, the numbers will always find a way to add up to something you didn't see coming.